This is your man, the STL Stranger, Umar Lee. I'm joining you live here from Midtown St. Louis, corner of West Pine and Vanderbilt at the, what's the name of this place?
Ventana.
Ventana, yeah. I seem to have a bad memory of this place. Something bad happened with like a cab passenger when I was a taxi driver, but I can't quite remember it. But I'm sure the coffee's lovely and the food is great.
The beignets are excellent.
Benet. I have no idea what a benet is. I did have a crush on Lisa Bonet, one of my first crushes as a kid. But, yeah. So, Rick, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Rick?
Bonasch.
Bonasch. Rick. Okay. So I'm here with Rick Bonasch, who is, he's done all kinds of things. He's music, he's affordable housing, all kinds of things. But first, I want to get into your background.
Okay.
Are you a St. Louis native yourself? Or?
No, I'm not. I was actually born in Michigan, but when I was a little baby, our family moved to California, and so I was raised out there.
What part of California?
The San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
And actually moved from the little town of San Pablo, which is next to Richmond, when my dad was first starting his career. And then in about 1965, our family moved to the white suburbs of a town called Dublin, California, bought a home there for $29,000. About 3 or 4 years later, my parents divorced, and my mom, she moved into the city of San Francisco, and my dad stayed with the house in Dublin. And so from the time I was in about 4th grade, I started riding the bus from Dublin into the city of San Francisco to visit my mom. And so I kind of had this dual upbringing between the suburban white experience and then the lower Nob Hill, upper Tenderloin district of San Francisco. And
you'll probably be the opposite now.
Well, yeah, I live in the city of St. Louis.
No,
now.
I mean in San Francisco. It'd be, because the demographic shifts in Frisco.
Yeah, we could talk a whole lot about the differences between the Bay Area and California and St. Louis. We could have the whole conversation about that, and a book that needs to be written, actually.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so it gave me a rich experience growing up, all kinds of different people. My mom, she had a hard time making it, but she was a survivor, and so anyway, I went to public school, public high school, public college in California.
What school in California?
Cal State Hayward.
Okay.
And then I got married in 1985, and a series of things happened that led my wife and I to have to make some choices about our future and where we wanted to live. And an opportunity arose for a relocation here to St. Louis. And so we accepted that in 1986. We lived in West County from 1986 to 1989. And we found ourselves always coming into the city for our recreation and restaurants and just all kinds of things. We love the neighborhoods. And so we had we started to build a real love for St. Louis. Then in 1989, an opportunity arose for me to return, my wife and I, to California to go to work for a home builder there. We sat down and did a long side-by-side comparison, thinking about our life in St. Louis versus moving back to California, rated all of these different factors. St. Louis actually came out higher, the choice of where to live, because of our ties to family and all that. We thought, well, what the heck, let's give it a try and move back out to California. This was in 1989. So we made that move, and from the time we were out there, we were unhappy with our choice. We didn't think we made the right decision, and we moved out there in the middle of an extremely hot seller's market for buying housing. We thought we were going to be able to afford to buy a home there. That did not turn out to be the case. I was involved in long commutes to work sites, like 5 and 6 hours into the Central Valley, down near Fresno, where the builder I was working for was building a subdivision on what had been, farmland. All of this I'm thinking about and think this is just not the kind of work I want to be doing. And then my wife got pregnant in 1992, we knew right then that we did not want to raise our son out in the Bay Area in California, and so we started to figure out how could we return to St. Louis. And we were able to put things together in a way that we were back here in February of 1993. Our son was born in March of 93, and 25 years later, he's finishing graduate school at UMSL. He's going to become a school psychologist, and all of us still live in the city of St. Louis.
How about that?
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned San Francisco. I have a friend out in San Francisco, Jack Moss, and she's involved with many different community efforts there. You know, we can look at all the differences. I just came from Dallas. The difference between metros. Dallas gained 143,000 last year alone in the metro. And the problem we're having down there is too much growth. And they're worried they're going to get Amazon, and it's going to, help lead to further congestion and lack of affordable housing. Whereas St. Louis is like kind of a desperation thing. No one ever believed St. Louis was going to get Amazon. It's kind of, and obviously, growing too fast is not a problem. We'll get to St. Louis in a second. But one thing interests me about San Francisco, I think it's one of the leaders in the kind of development model that I don't like, which has become prevalent in many cities and to a certain extent has been mimicked in St. Louis. The city has become a hub for the wealthy. You have to have a lot of money to buy a house in San Francisco. You have people with good jobs with housing insecurity in San Francisco. I was talking to a friend who grew up in the East Bay, and he drives 3 hours to work each way. And he said that's common. People super commutes in the Bay Area just because it's a real struggle to find affordable housing. And when I lived in New York, I saw the same thing. People moving out to the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania to commute to work in New York or moving way upstate. The affordability was lacking. And that's one of my problems with the modern Democratic Party, or you could say modern progressives in general, is that housing hasn't been centered. The cities one thinks of as being the most progressive cities are often the places with the least housing affordability. And there's a lot of reasons. I mean, they're desirable places to live. They're universities, obviously, there's reasoning, but it doesn't seem like housing is prioritized as a right, as affordable housing.
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that led to us moving away from California the first time, I worked for a home builder out there that had been established in the 1840s, acquiring land all around the Bay Area. And they had a development proposal to build a 5,000-acre new town with affordable housing. And they had spent years working on putting this project together. It went to the Board of Supervisors for approval. Everybody knew there was a housing shortage. This was back in the early 80s. And
pre-Silicon Valley and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And but the housing costs and commuting and traffic and all that was already a concern there. And so the Board of Supervisors approved this development, this general plan amendment to the Alameda County Master Plan. But what they did was they conditioned it on voter approval. And so the voters in Alameda County, when asked for their support for this new town development, they turned it down by a 2-to-1 margin. So while this perception that the area is progressive and all of this out there, there's a lot of, I got mine, I'm not concerned about you.
Yeah, well, I've seen it. I mean, I don't know, the thing that was making the rounds a few weeks ago about the town hall in Manhattan when they were saying they wanted to work on integration of schools in Manhattan, and you had this huge town hall. So,
yeah.
You've seen that before. So you come to St. Louis, and do you continue to work in home building here in the St. Louis Metro? Or?
I do, and actually I'm the Director of Technical Assistance for RISE Community Development. RISE is a nonprofit organization. We
Not
work
affiliated with Rise Coffee.
Totally different, yeah. Maybe a similar purpose, who knows, to build community.
Nice people.
Yeah, but our organization has been around since the late 80s, early 90s, actually. We were created through the the merger of the Technical Assistance Corporation and Regional Housing Alliance, that
which are non-governmental agencies,
all private nonprofit organizations. Regional Housing Alliance was a university project to help build capacity in community-based organizations for neighborhood revitalization. And then Technical Assistance Corporation stemmed out of the Reagan Tax Reform Act in 1986, where passive losses were taken away from investors, which led to a lot of foreclosure of rental properties in St. Louis, backed by the banks. And in an effort to work out the ownership of those properties, TAC was created, took ownership of these properties, about 800 units of apartments in Soulard, Central West End, and Shaw mainly, and managed those properties for many years with the goal of returning those to the private market, most of which has been done. In the early 90s, TAC and Regional Housing Alliance were consolidated into the Regional Housing Community Development Alliance. I started working there about 2000, and I've been with the organization ever since that time. We rebranded it a few years ago as Rise Community Development. And
more catchy.
Yeah, I mean, these days you gotta be able to get a message across to people about what you're really trying to do. And RHCDA, Regional Housing Community Development Alliance, that sounded more like a government agency than a nonprofit organization. But we continue with the same spirit we've had the whole time, to work in partnership with community-based organizations to build strong and healthy neighborhoods. And we do that through a range of things, including training, technical assistance organizations. We do neighborhood planning. We do co-development. We do development consulting. And then we do our own development projects.
What are some of the main areas? Are you just St. Louis City, or are you St. Louis County as well?
We work in Madison County in Illinois, City of St. Louis, and St. Louis County.
So are there any areas right now that you're heavily involved in that people may be familiar with?
Very much so. For many years, we've been heavily involved in the Forest Park Southeast Grove area, Old North St. Louis, and in South St. Louis in the Dutchtown area. We continue all those activities. We're building in Forest Park Southeast. It's the place where we probably had the greatest long-term impact. In the late 90s, we were assisting the Forest Park Southeast Housing Corporation in strategic planning. We work with the organization to go through a process to define their mission and goals, and one of the things they wanted to do was put the northern half of the neighborhood onto the National Register, which to make the area qualified for historic tax credits. That happened. The organization renamed itself from the Forest Park Southeast Housing Corporation to Forest Park Southeast Development Corporation. They did that, and then we worked together with them to acquire and renovate a collection of poorly managed rental properties that were suffering from a lot of crime and vacancy. Those properties were acquired, redeveloped using state and federal historic and low-income housing tax credit, about 90 properties in all. We redeveloped those as a mix of affordable rental housing and home ownership housing. At the time, the neighborhood was nothing like it is today. There was no Grove. Most of Manchester Road, the storefronts were all vacant.
I worked at Acorn, which was 4304 in Manchester.
All right, great. So you've seen the changes there then over time. And the private market has returned. People like Guy Slay have really helped to lead the neighborhood back. And so just in the past couple of years then, with the way things have transformed so much, there's been a call for we need to preserve affordability here. We need to figure out a way to let the...
Right, that's what I say now. It's becoming the Grove, as you say, which didn't used to be a thing. I remember when Manchester was vacant. I remember there was a donut shop and a Chinese restaurant, and that was about our food options when I worked at Acorn. And so now we seem to become a very popular destination. They're constructing what I would consider high-income housing there now with these high-rise buildings.
And homes. I mean, there was a time when you could buy a home there for under $30,000. Now they're building new infill housing for over $300,000.
Right.
And so a lot of people were concerned, what's the future like here? And so, City Garden Montessori has really become a draw for the area in places like Shaw.
That's on Tower Grove. That's totally right?
Yeah, correct. Mm-hmm. And they prioritize low-income families to send their kids to that school, and they were concerned that the low-income families could remain in the area with all the revitalization of Shaw, Botanical Heights, and Forest Park Southeast. So together with Washington University Medical Center Redevelopment Corporation, they have been for some time acquiring vacant properties in the area, probably south of Manchester and west of Tower Grove. They put together a request for proposals for developers, and we were selected to carry out the Adams Grove project, which is now being completed to provide 50 new, beautiful infill, contemporary design, new homes, all with long-term
Those are like on
affordability.
Arco and those
Yep.
blocks?
Yeah, exactly. That project is wonderful. If people haven't seen it, they should go and check it out.
I will.
Just to the west of Adams School there.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting neighborhood because once you get south of Manchester, the architecture changes. It doesn't look. You got the north of Manchester, you got the brick, and you have a lot of frame houses south of Manchester, and you have an interesting mix because when people hear the Grove, most people statistically don't hang out anywhere, so they just hear the Grove on TV or online. They thought of it as like an LGBTQ hub, which it is, but there's also a lot of international restaurants on Manchester. There's a little bit of everything, actually, whatever you're looking to get into.
Trops now.
Yeah. What?
Trops, they got shut down in Soulard. They got a new home in the Grove.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, yeah. So I know there's a lot of new businesses open. I think a new Middle Eastern restaurant just opened. And it's an interesting place. Obviously, my only concern is as a guy that is primarily concerned with blue collar issues, is that that some affordability remains. I don't want to I don't want you to have to be wealthy to live in that neighborhood, and so that would be my primary concern about Forest Park Southeast. Now, some of those other neighborhoods you mentioned, like Dutchtown, that's not the stage of development they're at. I kind of look at Dutchtown, so you have Shaw, which has become, and my mother used to live on Shenandoah when it was, one of the hottest drug blocks in the city. 4,000 block of Shenandoah, Doma, and Thurman, open-air drug markets, the whole 9 yards. And so Shaw has become a very desirable place to live. And then you have Tower Grove South and Tower Grove East, and the speculation about what's the future of Dutchtown. Now, I happen to think, and this is my personal opinion, that it won't get as hot as Shaw and those other areas because part of the appeal of Shaw or Tower Grove or Benton Park is you can buy a beautiful old home, a large, beautiful old home for a very affordable price. Historically, that's changed now with the house. And Dutchtown is more what I consider to be houses built for really blue-collar people, and with small houses, and which is perfectly fine with me. But I don't see it having that same type of appeal that Shaw would, which is aesthetically very beautiful and neighboring the garden. So how do you see the future of Dutchtown?
Well, actually, we, for the past about almost 2 years, have been working with Dutchtown South Community Corporation in a community-based planning effort for the area that is roughly the same boundaries as Jefferson Streetcar National Register Historic District. All of the area bounded by Jefferson on the east, Gravois on the north, South Grand on the west, and Merrimack on the south. Okay. So that takes in all of Park West, all of Gravois Park, and then Dutchtown north of Merrimack, between Grand and Jefferson. And that has that effort is called the Gravois Jefferson Historic Neighborhoods Plan, and it was just adopted by the Planning Commission of the City of St. Louis earlier this month, and so we've become very familiar with through that effort, we've become very familiar with the area on a lot of levels, and the plan is a lot different from the kind of neighborhood plans that people are accustomed to. This is about a lot more than land use and development. It's about youth and education. It's about jobs and economic development. It's about public safety. It's about and arts. And
all those being big issues there.
Right.
You have a young population, a lot of young families, a lot of families with some housing insecurity moving from 4-family flat to 4-family flat. You have a lot of diversity in Dutchtown, both African American and a lot of immigrants, refugees in that area as well.
Right. A lot of low-income people,
right.
A lot of young people, and so a lot of challenges for the community to work on. One of them being very old housing stock, very historic, but very antiquated in their systems, and a challenge for whether they're the landlords or the homeowners to maintain these properties. So through this process, work was done to identify a range of strategies to assist, whether it's low-income renters, landlords, low-income homeowners, to help preserve the housing stock and maintain affordability and attract investment. And that's just in the housing component of this plan. So, we've just completed that work. Dutchtown South Community Corporation is the CC representing the bulk of that area. Amanda Cologne Smith, the executive director there, she led the community engagement and with her organization through this process. We had a community-based steering committee. We worked with the 3 aldermen for the whole area.
That would be Shane Cohn.
Yeah, Shane Cohn, Dan Gunther, and Kara Spencer. We had 6 large public meetings, and we collected over 100,000 individual pieces of public feedback through this process leading to the plan. And if people are interested in now learning more about it, they can go to gravois.jeffersonplanning.org and download and read the whole document. I encourage them to do so. There's opportunities for neighbors and organizations and interested people to all work together on different facets of this.
Has the city been helpful in this, or
They have. We consulted with Don Roa and the Planning and Urban Design Agency from the beginning. Alana Green at the Community Development Administration was supportive in helping us to put mapping information together. But as you know, the city's planning department has a small staff, and they don't have the resources to do this kind of full-scale neighborhood planning. So they rely on outside parties to help make that happen. This was privately funded, and we were fortunate to be able to raise the funds to get the support to do that. And really, what brought this about was we were working doing real estate development of affordable housing in the Dutchtown and Gravois Park area. When we started working on this, it became apparent there was no neighborhood plan for the area, and it's hard to plan for long-term growth and sustainability without there being a community-engaged neighborhood plan. So we started that planning process at the same time we began working on our real estate projects there. We have one that's under construction now called Chippewa Park. It's 15 buildings, centered Chippewa in the Dutchtown and Gravois Park area, and then we have a new development plan that is pending a funding decision called Marquette Homes, which is further south, closer to Merrimack, but still in the Gravois Park area.
What are you doing out in St. Louis County right now?
We have just completed a project in Lime with the housing partnership, building 40 new homes on vacant or vacant lots or homes that needed to be upgraded. All vacant property, though no displacement of any residents. And we the Lime, or the housing partnership, formerly Lime Housing Partnership, for many years have worked in that South County community. Excuse me, another area with a lot of immigrant population, lower income residents, and elderly residents.
Dave, just to stop right there, because we might be both be familiar, but so Lime south of the city of St. Louis, and it's a lot of low income residents. You mentioned the immigrant population. A lot of Bosnians are moving out to Lime, Melville, those areas of South St. Louis County.
Right. Yeah, and buying and rehabbing homes, which is good.
Right.
The housing partnership focused on the South Broadway section leading up into Jefferson Barracks to revitalize that corridor, and the county.
Only trip I ever make to South County is to go see dead relatives in Jefferson Barracks.
So
beautiful park, by the way.
So we're together with the housing partnership after we completed that 40-home new construction single-family development, which actually has been a good thing for the area. Hancock School District is down there, and they've noticed an uptick in their enrollment in the district. The kids are doing better in schools, but there's also a large senior population there, and so we currently have an application pending for a 50-home multifamily mixed-use development on South Broadway with the housing partnership, where They would be able to co-locate their offices on a storefront on South Broadway, together with the Lee May Chamber and the Lee May Development Corporation, and then senior housing upstairs.
It's been okay to deal with. I know it's been tough to, some development's been tough in South County.
Well, we have good support for that. We're waiting a decision on the project from the Missouri Development Commission, and we'll just have to see what happens with that. It's very competitive to get these projects approved, and it's decided in Jefferson City with the Missouri Housing Development Commission. And then we've done more work in St. Louis County. We've built about 100 homes in Wellston, all single-family new construction.
I remember those new homes.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. I remember being in front of one of these houses as a cab driver, and I was dropping off somebody across the street, and can we do like court reporting? I was dropping off across the street, and there was an incident. Wellston police came to the back of the building, to the sides of the building, with their guns out, looking for a guy. And the guy just walked out the front door and walked out of the house, which I thought was pretty amusing. I hope he wasn't like a serial killer or something, but that was in one of the brand new houses.
And just real quick, we've done a lot of work in Illinois as well. We've built a development in the village of East Alton called Emerald Ridge, where a lot of old housing that was intended to be temporary from World War II was replaced with a beautiful new development of affordable housing around a park in the center of East Alton. We've built, together with the Mount Sinai Development Corporation, East St. Louis, 2 phases of affordable housing in the heart of East St. Louis in the Winstanley neighborhood. And we were just notified this week by the Illinois Housing Development Authority that we were awarded tax credits to redevelop the historic downtown Granite City YMCA in the heart of downtown Granite City.
Is facing some, obviously it was a steel town, and you had the mill and a lot of good jobs over there, there was a whole ecosystem surrounding the mill. And obviously they've had a downturn, so there's been a lot of concern about the future of Granite City. So.
Yeah, but good happening over there too. Neat arts district forming, really neat downtown, very close to downtown St. Louis. Maybe this will get more into the conversation where we are as a region and what are our goals.
The Mississippi, I would say, is like the Berlin Wall, right? It's like people from Missouri don't go over there unless they're going to strip clubs or maybe Fairmount Park. They just don't go to the east side. Like when I lived I've lived in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia throughout the metro. You see Maryland people going to Virginia all the time, and vice versa, and everyone's going to D.C. Missouri people, and the same thing you see in Kansas, Missouri, between Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas. They just don't go to Illinois and don't think about Illinois. And it's like, there's a whole other state over there. There's a huge population. There's a lot of things going on in the Metro East. I think we just don't pay enough attention to on the Missouri side of the river.
I think you're right. We've got a real sort of kind of parochial mentality here. We don't get out of our neighborhoods very much, but that is, hopefully that's changing, and we can work to become more open to other communities in our region. And an example of that. SLACO, the St. Louis Association of Community Organizations, last year, together with the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency of the City of St. Louis, started a new program called Neighborhoods United for Change. And what that's about is residents from different neighborhoods across St. Louis getting together, just a casual acquaintance, sitting down for a meal, getting to know each other, and visiting each other's neighborhoods. That's happening more and more. And that program's continuing in the city of St. Louis.
Even in the city of St. Louis, I see the people with the city bumper sticker on the back. It's a big virtue thing. I live in the city, therefore I am morally superior to you, or that kind of thing.
Right.
They don't, but they have this kind of disdainful attitude towards county residents or Metro East residents. Or I don't really see that as all that helpful to a more cohesive region.
Well, Umar, I agree with you on this whole question of fragmentation.
Right.
It's probably the biggest single issue holding St. Louis back. Whether it's the Illinois-Missouri divide, St. Louis County, St. Louis City, St. Charles County, St. Louis County, Jefferson County, all of these different boundaries dividing us. and we're one region. And it's something that we haven't done a good job working on, whether it's just something as basic as participation in the Zoo Museum District for our neighboring counties of Jefferson County and St. Charles County, cooperation on public transportation throughout the region. A big one to me is the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. We have our great city of St. Louis Metro Police Department, great tradition, many, many years, but then we have about 60 police departments or whatever it is in St. Louis County. The idea that we don't have one unified Metropolitan Police Department creates a lot of difficulties for us. Say the same thing about the court system. I mean, there are just so many structural challenges we deal with here that hold us back. Raise cost, increase distrust, further fragmentation. These things need to be addressed.
Yeah, for those that may not be familiar, we have little municipalities in St. Louis County that may have a few hundred residents or 1,000, 2,000 residents with their own mayor, their own police department. They may have 3 or 4 cars in the department. If there is a felony committed, they have no resources whatsoever to investigate this. They have to call St. Louis County. They can't investigate a homicide. They can't investigate, sexual assault, and they're relying on St. Louis County or the major case squad of the metro region. So we have a lot of way too many police departments, way too many fire departments, way too many school districts. I went to Ferguson, Florissant schools. We had Hazelwood next door, and you got Rittner, and you got Normandy, and you got. In just in North St. Louis County, you got several, Hazelwood District and Riverview Gardens, and Pattonville, and when I moved to other places, you have one school district for the whole county in some places, or one police department for the whole county in some places.
Yeah,
and it's a big problem. Do you think one issue with the city of St. Louis is that because the planning staff is so small, relatively small for a city of size, or that there's an over-reliance on consultants and outside help and things of that nature? Or do you think that's a plus that allows new ideas to get in?
I think we need a stronger function in the city of St. Louis, without a doubt. They've got a real good staff there, but it's so small they don't have the ability to carry on long-term, in-depth, community-driven planning efforts for neighborhoods. We need that. We really don't have a citywide plan. The closest thing we have to that is the strategic land use plan for the entire city, which now governs all broad-based planning decisions. So, for example, the Grabo-Jefferson plan had to be reviewed for consistency against that plan. But neighborhoods like the West End, O'Fallon, Carondelet, Hyde Park, these places don't have their own plans. And so developers can come in, and it's a one-on-one type issue with the neighborhood or the alderman to figure out what are we going to do here. There's not a guiding policy. That hurts us. And so right now, the best we can do is work together with different organizations to do as much privately resource planning as possible. But over time, we would benefit from a stronger planning function in the city, for sure.
So let me ask you about yourself. What part of the region do you live in?
Where do I live?
Yeah.
I live in South St. Louis.
South St. Louis? Dutchtown? Or?
I live in the part of the city that benefits from higher income.
Okay, all right. Now, so I hear you're a musician as well.
I am.
What kind of music?
I play bass, I play guitar, and I have a lot of friends who play, so we go around over St. Louis and play music. Yeah.
I've never been to a concert in my life outside the symphony orchestra. I like the symphony. So I don't know a lot about music, but Mark told me you were like a musical maestro, and it's interesting. It's a part of St. Louis that I don't really know a lot about, because I know there are a lot of musicians and bands, in the area. There's a scene. There's one woman that I'm friends with on Facebook, and I just know her from politics. She talks about politics a lot. Sunyata McDermott, and
who is that?
Sunyata McDermott.
Okay.
And she's like a head of a rock band that's like really popular. And I just, I vaguely remember her talking about music. Yeah,
it's one of those things that, unlike Nashville, unlike Memphis, St. Louis has not done a good job really marketing our music legacy here. We got a lot of great music, a lot of great history. We could do a lot more with it.
Yeah, Chingy's from St. Louis.
Yeah.
That's a joke.
Can I ask you what got you into postcards?
Postcards?
Yeah.
So he's in the. We've got to preface that by Rick is in the postcards, and Mark is in the postcards. Yeah.
Well, it's probably what started it was social media, where I started seeing all of these historic postcards popping up online, and they were revealing these images of old St. Louis. And it's a fascinating thing. The architectural legacy and history of this town is one of the best in the United States. There's no question about that. And through these postcards, you can see what was here back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so there's really very few other places to really see those things. And so started getting more and more interested in it, and trying to find, where I could collect these. And fortunate to meet Mark Lehrer online, who has his STL postcard project, if I've got that right, where he has cataloged neighborhoods and institutions and parks and churches and all of these things in a beautiful collection of really the built environment history of St. Louis.
It's a really beautiful collection, I must say. I'm getting ready to design my own. It's going to be a quick trip. It's more modern in nature, but I was just looking at one the other day. It's an old building, Museum of Transport. It was the Palace of Transportation. Remember the World's Fair, and these beautiful old buildings we had.
Well, and I really want to stress that what we have here in this place is special, and a lot of people appreciate the architecture, but it's a lot more than that.
Oh yeah,
it's this earthy connection we have to this place. The clay soil that made it possible to make all this brick here, the limestone that was able to be carved into beautiful statues and cemetery monumentation and parts, elements and architectural elements and buildings, all of that, and then the craftsmen that came here from Europe and around the country to build these buildings. And then today we can walk around, and if you think about it, these neighborhoods, every single one of these bricks individually placed one by one. When we were working on that Gravois Jefferson Historic Neighborhoods Plan, we surveyed every individual building in the entire area. It's over 5,000 buildings. And after a while, when you think about all of the time and effort and craftsmanship that went into creating that area, it's just something really special. And we now have the opportunity to sustain those things and work with, and make them communities where people want to live. And so, one of the things that I think we struggle with here is the quest for architectural appreciation and historic preservation, and then the way that people and community organizations come together and fill these spaces.
You guys are a lot deeper than me. I think of St. Louis like Budapest in Hungary. Great city. If you get a chance to visit Budapest, do it. Or the historic, I can't remember the name of it right now, there's a historic Hungarian Catholic Church, just right by the riverfront. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I've never been there.
So it's like from the 19th century church, a Hungarian Catholic. They have a Hungarian festival every year, just like the Greeks in Central West St. Helens. It's right, if you take Shoto into the riverfront, you cross Broadway.
In Kosciuszko?
Yeah. No, not Kosciuszko. Whatever the hell it's called. I don't go by. I don't go by most. No.
Okay.
Right downtown, right on the riverfront. I don't go by any of these neighborhood names that people don't use. Kosciuszko. I know I'm talking to a politician or a historian or something. Right. But it's right there. Anyway, my point is that Budapest was an Austro-Hungarian empire, which at the time was a world power. It was a great historical city. But now Hungary, I think, is like, hey, we were kind of lucky to get in the EU because, no one really wanted them in the EU, and it was kind of a political compromise, and they got in. So it's like a great tradition, a great history. You can point to great things in the past. And now people just kind of have the pride of, we're in Budapest. We're Hungarians. It may not be the best place in the world to be. It may not be. We may have our problems. We may have high unemployment. But this is where we're from. And we like Provel. And we like our St. Louis style pizza. and we like our Vest soda, and we like our very unhealthy Chinese food here that has no relation to China, and we're kind of proud of this, and we're proud of where we went to high school, and we ask people where they went to high school, and I love that question, and that's the kind of pride I can see mixed with the bricks and the soil and all that more deeper spiritual stuff you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, St. Louis is a unique place. It has a lot of charm, a lot of identity, a lot of tradition. These are all things that brought us back here, and the people are the main thing that holds all this together. We have our challenges, there's no question. I think a lot of times we're our own worst enemy when it comes to a lot of this. There's a weird inferiority complex about our community here, and we're sometimes our own worst enemy, airing our dirty laundry.
Bill McClellan used to say, St. Louisans look at you and say, well, the guy's not that good, he's in St. Louis.
Yeah, it's sad, really.
Yeah.
And I just came back from a conference in Milwaukee earlier this week. It was a Reclaiming Vacant Properties conference. Right. Up there, it's a whole different kind of feel. People are selling houses in the suburbs and moving into apartments in the city to get closer to the downtown area, to all the amenities. They don't have to deal with snow and ice and yard work. They live in dense urban environments. That's the kind of growth hopefully we'll start to see in St. Louis. We're seeing it in the Central West End. We're seeing it in the Grove. We're starting to see more of it downtown.
But that's good to a certain extent, but it leads to this question, which I've seen throughout the country. If you looked at D.C., plenty of people moving into D.C., higher income people that would have been out in Montgomery County or Fairfax County even 15, 20 years ago. When I lived in Brooklyn, I lived in Bed-Stuy. Everyone was, not everyone, but very high, low-income area, a lot of crime, and high-income people moved in. And you're seeing this in New York City and many other metros. You're seeing it in St. Louis too, but not to that high rate. But the net to me was the low-income people in the district stayed low-income. They just moved out to Prince George's County in Maryland. So now you have low-income suburbia in the D.C. metro. Or some moved way out in Virginia because affordability issues. How do you avoid that? How do you avoid people saying, hey, I want to live near the nightlife, I want to live near the bars, I want to live near the cultural institutions of St. Louis, but and then these things become popular, the more people move in, the more desirable it becomes. And the net result oftentimes is just those low-income residents leave and they're out in North St. Louis County or the equivalent, low-income suburbia. I mean, suburbia is very much the future of low-income America, of ghetto America, as you could say.
Suburbanization of poverty is a real issue, and we're seeing it very much in St. Louis. There's no question about that. But here inside the city of St. Louis, the one thing we got to keep in mind is there has been so much disinvestment and abandonment of within different neighborhoods that we have a lot of room to grow. We need growth in the city of St. Louis.
850,000 to 314.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we can have new development without displacing people. We can have rehab of vacant buildings without displacing existing residents. And then when we're working in areas with public incentives, such as whether it's financing or, say, tax abatement, we can be more creative in how we use those resources to build in provisions for long-term affordability for low to moderate income families, especially in areas with increasing property values and stronger markets. And now's the time to be looking at those approaches while values are still affordable. And so there are places where the market's not ready for that yet, but then there are other places like in the Central Corridor where there's no question that it is.
All right, Rick, I got to wrap this up, but I want to ask you a couple of important questions in closing. Okay. First of all, what may be perhaps the most important question of all, have you acquired a taste for St. Louis style pizza?
I'm glad you asked that question, Umar. And I'll tell you, it took a long time.
Yeah.
It took a real long time. Altogether, I've lived in St. Louis about 28 years now, and for probably 26 of those years, I couldn't do it. California pizza was, for anybody who's been out there, Round Table Pizza, I think is one of the best pizzas there is. The King Arthur Supreme, to be specific. So coming to St. Louis and look at this thin crust Emo's Pizza, which is, I couldn't stomach it. But I'm also a big St. Louis Blues fan. and
the hockey team.
Hockey, yeah. And hope someday to see them win the cup for us here. If I live that long, we shall see. But watching all those Emos commercials finally kind of wore me down. Started last couple of years buying it and liking it. So it's finally happened.
Look, man, we all have our struggles and journeys, and it's just like the Fellowship of the Ring. It took a long time to get there, but they eventually destroyed the ring. PhD take a long time, and so you finally landed in a good place. Now, the last question is, you grew up. Did you go to high school in Dublin,
I did.
California?
Dublin
What was the name of your high school? In
Dublin High School.
Dublin.
Yep.
What kind of school was that?
Well, it was probably 98% white, all middle class.
Was it
still there?
Was it? I know California is not an ethnic place like the East Coast, but was it homogenous ethnically, or was
it was totally white, suburbia. Wouldn't want my son to be raised in a place like that. All cheap construction. That house I started out to talk about that my dad bought for $29,000 in the mid 1960s is now worth $1 million.
Really?
And so for what, and you'd be getting a boring looking house like what you see here in Ellisville or whatever. 2x4 construction, drywall, and stucco. Not my personal cup of tea, especially for that kind of money.
Yeah. That's your cup of tea. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Rick Bonasch.
Don't worry about it. I've lived with that my whole life.
I knew I was going to mess that up. And we're out here in the beautiful elements of Midtown St. Louis at the coffee shop here in West Pine and Ventana. It's raining outside, so you might have heard a little noise. We have trucks. But we're out here in the elements of St. Louis, and that's what you're going to hear. This is a noisy, messy city. And get you some Illinois temp tags and ride for 10 years in the city of St. Louis. That's it.